I only look for stories that make us try to understand human connection better. And that's all I want to write about.
That is Jake Gronsky, co-author of A Short Season and a Best American Sports Writing 2019 notable selection for his piece, 9 Days in Cape Cod. Hey, this is CNF, the greatest podcast in the world. Let's hear from our flagship sponsor, Discover Your Story Man, with Bay Path University's fully online MFA in Creative Nonfiction Writing. Recent graduate. Is she recent anymore? Yeah. Recent graduate Christine Brooks recalls her experience with Bay Path's MFA faculty as being, quote, filled with positive reinforcement and a commitment. They have true passion and love for their work. It shines through with every comment, every edit, and every reading assignment. The instructors are available to answer questions big and small, and it is obvious that their years of experience as writers and teachers have made a faculty that I doubt can be beat anywhere. Don't just take her word for it. Apply now at baypath.edu/MFA. Classes begin January 21st. It's like a month away. You know what also sponsors this podcast, right? My monthly newsletter. That's right. This is going to be a real important thing heading into 2020. So you need to heed this house ad and subscribe to the newsletter at BrendanO'Mara.com. Hey, once a month, no spam. Can't beat it. 'Twas the pod before Christmas. No buts, ands, or ifs. The CNFers were waiting for B to say riff. It's CNF, the Creative Nonfiction Podcast. The show where I speak to badass people about the art and craft of telling true stories. I'm your host, Brendan O'Mara. Hey. Make sure you're subscribed to the show, man. If what I've made for you is worth sharing, I'd be honored and thrilled if you linked up to the show across your various networks. If you feel really moved by the giving season, leave a tax-deductible review on Apple Podcasts. Join the conversation at CNFPod on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, though I've curtailed my use of these quite a bit in order to get shit done, son. You can always email me and the show if you have questions or concerns. Recently read Cal Newport's Digital Minimalism, and if you struggle with the whole social media industrial complex like I do, it is well worth your time and money to read that. It'll definitely get you thinking more critically about how you go about your digital lifestyle. Today's guest is Jake Gronsky, as I said at the top of the show. He's a writer and a former minor league baseball player, so we draw on some of the parallels between writing and ball, as well as sticking up for your work. Nobody but Jake submitted his piece for Best American Sports Writing consideration, and he got a notable selection. That's an amazing honor, and it was because he took it on himself to stand up for his own piece. And I love that. I love the industrious nature of that. And why not? What's to lose? A little bit of postage. Just send it up to Hallberg, Vermont, and you might just get selected, and he sure as hell did. I'll say as an aside that the audio quality isn't superior for this episode. I'm sorry about that. I'm nipping it in the bud. But I think the content of Jake's insights will overcome that. And that makes me think of something. And if you're a writer in this day and age, even if you don't produce your own podcast, you're likely going to be on podcasts, right? I mean, it's just the nature of this business. It's time every writer invests in a good headset or microphone as part of your gear, part of your rig. Go listen to my interview with Sonia Huber. She was using a gamer headset, and she sounded like she was right next to me. It was amazing. I'd say most pods are recorded remotely, probably 9 out of 10, really. And there's likely no chance the producer can afford to hire a tape syncer to record a double-ender, so I think it's time y'all invested in a decent microphone. The one I used before, my Heil PR40, the one I use now with a boom arm, was a simple Audio-Technica ATR 2100 USB, and it is a damn good mic, and it's like $69 on Amazon. Anyway, that said, here's my conversation with the gracious and very thoughtful Jake Gronsky. Kid, aside from, of course, baseball, but, what were some of your other interests that, of course, would ultimately feed into who you would become as an adult?
Yeah, so that question, the way that it's asked, and if I could give any advice, it would probably not. It'd probably be not to do what I did. So I was only interested in baseball, right? Because that is, and that's the truth. Like I loved playing the game. I loved the sport. I loved everything about it. It was everything that I wanted to be, not just play. I didn't want to just play baseball. I wanted to be a baseball player. Ever since I was a kid, I hardly played any other sport. And again, I would not give that advice to an athlete today. I think playing other sports is really great for athletes, but I never had that interest other than baseball. My dad was actually, he's, such a great man, someone I look up to. He owns a small chiropractic care. He just retired, but he's always a writer. And my mom was an artist. And those were two interests that if I could get away from the field or just almost force myself away from the field, those are two things that I love. I'm trained as a fine artist, painter, and writer as well. And those were the two things I think that kind of kept that balance, that as much as I didn't want to have, that I needed. So it sounds a little corny, but even anything that I wrote when I was a kid, it was surrounded the game of baseball. And it's what I wanted to do. It's who I wanted to be. And especially growing up in a small town in central Pennsylvania, right outside of, the small foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, like that's all I ever wanted to do. It was the small town dream of playing baseball. And I was fortunate enough to be able to do that. So that is also one of the things that was so hard transitioning away from it, is when that was no longer the case. But yeah, again, growing up, I was a baseball player, and part of me still believes that I still am, which is always going to be part of me. And it's always going to be a struggle, but it's the truth that baseball is the only thing I really wanted to do.
Yeah, I can totally attest to that. It's when I was growing up, it was probably the only thing, even like thinking today, like it's truly the one thing I ever like stone cold wanted to be was a professional baseball player. And
Sure.
And it does consume you. Like a good night for me was spending a night in my basement hitting 500 balls off my Tony Gwynn indoor solo hitter. That's like
oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I had that same solo hitter as well. But
no kidding.
I actually blame. Oh yeah, but I also blame the game of baseball a little bit because it is as lovable as it is experiential. So every kid, the moment that you smell a baseball glove is the moment that you're hooked into not just the game of it, but the romanticized idea of fighting for something. It's the blue collar story. You go up through the minor leagues and you get to the big leagues. It's the underdog story of America, and it's kind of enrooted in our culture. So it's not like it's in a sense where, you have people all the time that play basketball, they play football, they want to play those sports. Baseball is the only sport because there's not a mold of a player. There's not a mold of a body. There's not a mold of a height, weight, or anything that you need. Baseball is the only sport where you play it once and now you're instantly wanting to become a professional baseball player. So I blame the game a bit. It is a bit addicting in that way. But it's also, it's the reason, it's one of the major aspects that built what I could possibly become. And I'm forever grateful towards the game for that.
Yeah, it's given that the obsessive nature of it that you applied to baseball, and how hard, and you've written about this too, like how hard is it to transition out of it, and then to maybe not weaponize is the wrong word. It's kind of like you refocusing that obsession you had for baseball onto something else. So. Yeah. Something constructive too, so that you could transition out of it and not feel, like a shell of your former self.
I'll say a couple things about that. First off, I am extremely fortunate because I made no money playing the game of baseball. It sounds weird, but I made nothing from it. minor league baseball is pretty much a stipend for you to live off of. Again, very privileged in the sense where athletics and baseball and, the academic side paid for an academic, scholarship and paid for my school. So, debt wasn't an issue in that sense, but you don't make any money playing minor league baseball. So because of that, when that ended, I had no other choice but to make something new. I couldn't just say, well, I played, 10 years in the big leagues. Now I'm 35. I don't need to make any more money in my life. So what purpose do I have anymore? I did not have that story. Mine was, I have nothing in my bank account. I need to be able to survive. So because of that, I had to start over. There was no other option for me. I feel, I wrote about this a little bit, but there's a lot more struggle that comes with players. And this is something that we don't talk about a lot, because the dream is to play 10, 15 years in the big leagues, make all this money that you could ever imagine, and then retire. It's like, okay, but you're still now 36 years old, 37 years old. Hopefully in the grand scheme of life, you spend more time as a non-baseball player than you do baseball player. And now you've made millions of dollars. You bought everything that you've ever wanted. Your whole family is squared. So are you really going to take an internship to start over at that age? Now you were the top 1% of a skill that now is rendered useless. So that is hard. That's where the challenge comes in, because now you have a choice to either do something or not. I didn't have a choice. So because of that, I had to start over. And fortunate enough for me, writing was the outlet that I poured myself into. And it's something that I was able to take the mentality of the obsession, the baseball, the training, the style, and be able to hone a craft that way. Now, the difference of it was, like I said, I grew up only wanting to be a baseball player. The struggle is now for identity. And that is one of the hardest struggles to go through. And that's something that I think I'll always go through. So with writing, I never claimed that I'm a writer. I'm Jake, and that has to be good enough. And I love and I dedicate myself to writing. Those are two totally different things. So it's definitely, having to start over for me was a blessing, because I had to. But it is definitely not talked about enough, and it's definitely something that people don't realize, that now you're fighting for no longer being Jake, oh, you're the baseball player, to now being, no, I'm simply Jake, and that needs to be enough, and it's hard.
Yeah, there's a great one of the essays you wrote. You and your dad are at a diner, and you were speaking to the waitress coming over, and you wrote that she embodied a contentment with life that I somehow lost on this journey of baseball. Somehow the dangling golden carrot of the big leagues overshadowed the joy and respect I had for this game and turned it into a desperate need for upward mobility, as if every step I took through the ranks was seen as merely a stepping stone for the next. She has all she ever needed right in front of her, and I had all that was left. And that really struck a chord with me, mainly because when I was playing, I lost sense of the joy of playing, and I was just like, this is just a rung on the ladder. And so that really struck a chord with me, that when you wrote that it was just always about upward mobility. Were you ever able, and this applies to writing too, because you kind of have to swim in where you are now and not always be concerned about the higher byline or whatever. So in a sense, how did you, what was your approach with ball? Were you able to be present and enjoy it in the moment, or was it always something to get you to another level?
Well, first off, thanks for reading that. That was a really personal essay that I was glad to share, and I appreciate you pulling out some of the finer prose that I would have to. I know there's a lot of cringeworthy stuff out there from it, so I appreciate you bringing that up, and it's true. And to answer that question, I was definitely able to find enjoyment of it. Like I said, the greatest thing to ever happen to me was being able to play the game of baseball. I loved it. And I did find that enjoyment on a daily basis, because without that, I don't think you could move up. So it is a catch-22. you need to be the best player today in order to see tomorrow. However, you're in a system that is built for upward mobility only. I mean, you're in, let's just use minor league baseball. And this is for any level, though. This is Little League, this is high school, this is college, but let's use minor league. If you're an A-ball, you have to be able to be the best in A-ball in order to get to double A. Nobody wants to be an A-ball player. Then you get to double A. Nobody wants to be a double A player. Same thing with triple A. I mean, you could go through any level of the minor leagues. I mean, there's 7 levels that people forget about in the minor leagues, but there's always going to be a next step. And then even in the big leagues, there's always going to be, okay, I'm on my rookie contract. I need to be on a long-term contract. Now I need to be an all-star. There's always going to be the next step. And the game itself is built that way. So it's tough, and there's no getting around it. It is very tough to explain to a player, hey, I know you're riding the buses in Iowa right now, but you need to be at your best on your 10 a.m. game on a Tuesday, because that's what gets you to the next level, not thinking about the next level. So it is tough. I was fortunate to find a small mix of that. However, in the grand scheme of what you're trying to do, you have to dive 100% into it. And that is very dangerous. You are really walking a very firm line. And I think that's what I was really alluding to in that part of that writing. I mean, we can go on for hours about that, but I remember there was a time we were in the Midwest. This was an A-ball, and we stopped after a game. I remember it was just one of those like tough games. Like we got killed. It was like a doubleheader. I don't think I was playing that well. I don't think anyone was playing well. And we stopped to get fast food on the way. And I remember us talking, the players, and us looking at, people that like hated their jobs in the fast food industry. And I remember us talking about, man, like, well, they get benefits. They actually get a salary. I mean, they get to go home after they're done working. In a way, we didn't even realize it, but we were idolizing what they had as they were doing the same against us. And that really opened my eyes to, like, no matter where you're at, you're always going to be thinking there's something else, and that is our own fault. And that is something that, I think that showed the lack of awareness we had, and the fact that when you dive into a system like that, you might lose yourself, and that is a very scary.
What would you say or identify are some of the first principles of what made you a driven athlete that you are subsequently taking over to sort of this next chapter as, in your career as a writer? What bleeds over in terms of principle for you?
Yeah, principles, just like, it's great that you brought this up, because the principles are the same. The biggest one that I would say is discipline. There's nothing about the game of baseball if it's not disciplined, where you're going to be playing the game day in and day out against the best competition that you'll ever face every single night. And you need to bring your A game no matter what. There's no thoughts of whether you're going to play that night, what's going to happen that night. No matter what, you need to show up, you need to do your job, and you need to be at your best. And that is the same thing with writing. I mean, you talk about, one, being disciplined of just being able to show up, two, being disciplined enough to being at your best, no matter what, what the assignment is, no matter what the story is, no matter how small the byline, no matter how big the story is, you show up and you do your best. That alone, I think really took me, it really took me a few further steps than I imagined. And the second one that's really important is, the ability to show up knowing you're going to fail more times than you're going to succeed. Like now, for me, taking criticism for my writing, I am very much welcome to. I'm actually looking for, more of it, in a sense, because I know that's what gets writers to tell better stories. In baseball, you are criticized more than you are celebrated. And if you can embody that and not take it personally and take it as work, as someone helping you, that I think really gave me an advantage mentally of being able to write, being able to critically analyze what I wrote, being able to deconstruct, and then being able to do it all over again. Those two things alone, I think, are perfect parallels between baseball and writing.
Yeah. What was it like for you to go from being so, supremely, skilled in your one chosen discipline as a ball player, and then as you transition to your career as a writer, essentially you're starting, in your mid to late 20s at something that's relatively new. So what was that like to essentially be kind of a novice again?
The first thing that I always think about, even in baseball, I was never overly talented at the game, but if we're talking strictly about writing, first and foremost, I am an apprentice, and that's the way I hope I always look at writing. There's way better writers than I can ever be out there, which is great for our generation of writers. We could read anything at our fingertips right now. We can take any class that we want. We can learn from some of the greatest. So to me, I took it as an apprenticeship, and I will forever be that. Second off, writing, I think more specifically storytelling, it's not something that is strictly found in a classroom. There's a lot of MFA. There's a lot of MFA programs that are dynamite, that are great. And some of the best writing, some of the best stories comes from people that are not afraid to fail, that are willing to take chances, that are able to live life and find a sense of wisdom, or maybe find a sense of failure that they can now write about. And that's something that I really take to heart. The positives that I have as a writer of being able to, connect with people, especially on a sports diamond or a sporting event, and being able to see the person beneath the athlete. Those are some positives that really do help me out. The technical side of writing, I'm always going to be an apprentice. I can always get better. I can always learn more. And so I never thought of it as that I was behind the eight ball, even in a way with my first book and first story. I was in a very fortunate and strange position where I was going through a lot of learning and growing pains as a writer, in public. My first book was written when I was 24, was published when I was 26. And I really do believe I'm very proud of the work that me and Dave Boner were able to create and the story that we were able to tell. But just rereading the story, I would reread the whole thing as I would now. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. So I don't know if I would be lying if I said that I was ever behind the eight ball, or if I started late, because I was fortunate enough to have experience of failure, of trying and striving for something great and not being able to get it. And that's where a lot of great stories happen.
What would you identify that you felt you were particularly strong at even at the beginning part of your apprenticeship as a writer?
I pretty much made every mistake possible as a writer, except for being able to tell the story beneath the story. That's something, I don't know if it was something that I learned in college writing, in amateur writing, or if that was innate. But I was fortunate enough to always be on the correct story. And the one thing I love about the writing world and readers in general is that they are very forgiving. People are very forgiving at their core, which is nice in the writing world specifically, where if there's a cringeworthy sentence, or maybe something that's a little too fragrant, a little too overworked, a little too overwritten, we can get past that. Your mind can get past that if the story is right. If we're telling the right story at the right time and being able to connect human experience to words. So my strongest element, I think, is being able to find that and write about it.
Yeah, that takes a bit of skill too, and especially having once you have that sort of kernel, and then of course it's a matter of not overworking the dough, so to speak. It's telling it,
absolutely,
telling it as straight as possible, and showing some restraint, because I think as writers you want to have some sort of artistic flair, but oftentimes what's best is if you have the story, it's best to sort of surrender to that and just get out of its way.
100%. I mean, the amount of times that I've overwritten everything, I mean, I think that's the true sign of an amateur. I don't mean that pretentiously. It's, naturally we want to tell everything because we're so excited about it. But, the amount of times that I've told readers that 2 + 2 equals 4, rather than just leaving it at 2 + 2, I can't even count. So, and that's where I think the best learning comes in, where I can look at things and think, if I was able to tell this smaller story, this beneath story, then I didn't need to tell anything else. If you can find the story that can help us understand human connection, there's nothing else that we need to say as a writer. The rest is a relationship that the reader has. And that's what I love about reading. That's what I love about great writers, that they're able to, allow the reader to take the story to where it needs to go. And we can't force that on a reader. And I think that's some of the best learning that I had to go through. Some of it privately, some of it publicly in my writing. And that's something that I take near and dear now. How can I make this leaner? How can I make it straighter? How can I make it more, how can I make it easier for the reader to connect these dots? And that's what I'm trying to do.
And as a freshman at Monmouth, what was the experience you had with Chad Dell's class? And was that maybe the seed that was planted that said, like, maybe that you could be a writer someday?
Man, I'm so happy you brought up Dr. Dell. He is someone very special to me, and good for you for finding that somewhere. So Dr. Dell, he always now tells me to call him Chad, but he will forever be Dr. Dell to me. At that time, freshman year, I was a baseball player. I was a kid that I wanted to play professional baseball, and that was it. And I took, a simple writing course with him, and everything that I wrote, he would kind of push even more. He would keep pushing me. And then all he said was, "Hey, I don't know what you're going to do or where you're going to go. I just want you to take one class with me every semester. Like every one of my writing courses, just take it." So I was like, yeah, fine. I like writing. It's something that really, it allows me to escape the game. So this makes sense. It helps my baseball career. That's literally how I thought of it. Like that's how shallow I thought of it. And so I took it, and, I was so pompous and so full of myself. He was introducing me to more literary agents in college, and I was introduced to baseball agents, and I took it, I don't want to say took it for granted, because I didn't. I appreciate everything that he did for me, but I didn't think that was me. I said, hey, I love writing, and one day I want to write, I want to continue to write, but, I'm a baseball player. So, and I remember after 4 years, we sat down and we were talking about graduation, a little bit about baseball, and he said, "You know what? Just keep writing. No matter what, just keep writing for yourself. You don't need to do anything with it, but just don't stop what you've done for 4 years." So, and so I did. And then it was really incredible, after my first book was able to come out, and now we still are able to talk about it. And he's able, he's still, and it kind of sucks, he's still pushing me. The stuff that I bring up to him, he always finds a way to push it to the next level of not saying, he's never once said, "Yeah, great job, Jake. Just do what you are." There's always something that he finds in me that he believes in me. And that's what I've taken from him. He was the first person to ever believe in my writing. And it means a lot because I know no one in this industry really. And he was the first one just to simply say, "Your writing is good enough, and now it's time to do everything else."
It's so important to have mentors like that who just put enough gas in your tank to say that you're not completely deluded. Like, just keep doing it, keep leaning into it, right? And just put in the repetitions, because this is something that you're always going to improve at if you just have rigor and tenacity. And you need those kind of people in your corner.
Oh, absolutely. And again, like it all came from such a place where I had no intention of ever being like, oh, well, maybe he can introduce me to some agents. Like, I mean, it was a friendship. It was something that we both cherished each other's relationship, and now being able to talk to him and still being able to seek advice, that means so much to me. And like you said, it is nice after getting your 30th rejection from something that you thought was going to be fire, and him say, you know what, it just wasn't right. And here's why. It really does matter for somebody to say, you're right there. We just need to find the right doors for you to bang on. So I'm glad you brought him up. That just made my day. So thanks for bringing up Dr. Dell.
Yeah, of course. And the what you bring up too about timing and the 30 rejections, like so much of that stuff is. It really comes down to luck sometimes, and you could even bring it back.
Sure.
Bring it back to ball, like depending on what position you play. In the hierarchy of an organization, like if you were a talented shortstop coming up in the 90s and 2000s for the Yankees organization, there was a big bottleneck right there at shortstop at Yankee Stadium. There's a wall there. You're not going to be a shortstop for the Yankees. It's just not going to happen. And same with catchers or something, because they're only going to carry 2 catchers, maybe a bullpen catcher. And so it's a matter of, it really is timing and luck. So sometimes it's not even a matter of you as a ball player or you as a writer. It's just like circumstances aren't in your favor. Maybe they just published something that you pitched, and it's not that you wrote a bad pitch. It's just that, 2 months ago we wrote something already on that. It doesn't mean you're bad. It's just bad timing.
Absolutely. And it does go back to, the ability to not personify a lot of your failures or even successes. I mean, a lot of success, we need to realize, especially as writers, a lot of our successes come from the same spigot as our failures. So if we're talking about my writing career very analytically and taking the personal side out of it, I was fortunate enough to start my career with a story that a lot of people, a lot of sports writers, would have killed to have had the opportunity. The story with Josiah Vieira and Dave Boner was such a great story for me to learn about, to me to understand. And there was been 1,000 writers that would have loved that. But the fact that Dave and we were able to connect at one of my weakest moments in life and one of his toughest moments, that gave us a bond that now gave trust to what we were doing. And that gave Dave the ability to say, hey, I want to work on a project. Would you work on it with me? Things like that. That doesn't just happen because he read a few of my articles and thought that I was the best writer ever. He liked my writing, don't get me wrong, and I do believe that I put work in for that. But, it was the fact that it came from something other than a pitch. And, a lot of times, success and failure, like you just said, in baseball or in writing, are going to be out of our control, big time.
And the fact that the serendipitous nature of how you even met Dave and Josiah was like, weren't you like hit by a pitch and that sent you to State College to rehab over there or to be evaluated by their doctors, and then that's how you crossed paths, right?
The way we met, again, was one of the lowest moments in my career. Like, what happened was I was finally, as they say, figuring it out at the plate. I had one of the hottest months of my career, and I'm not saying this to boost my ego at all. And, this is part of the story that I was finally figuring out. I remember my roommate, Harrison Bader, he's the center fielder for the Cardinals now, and I remember he was 3 for 4 that day or something. I was 4 for 4 with 2 doubles, like everything you could imagine. I remember us after the game talking about, hey, this was exactly what we needed. We were both getting hot at the right time. The team was playing better. And I remember him saying, like, dude, we're going to Double-A next year. We're rooming together, and this is it. The next day, I got hit with a fastball and broke my hand. That ended my season. Even to the point where, I knew my leash for an organization was very short. I asked if I could not get casted and I could just figure out how to put my hand on a bat and just play the last month because I wasn't guaranteed coming back for spring training. And granted, that was a legal issue, so they shut that down quick. But after that, I grew up right outside of where the state college Spikes play. So they said, hey, instead of going to Florida for like a weekend to check with our doctor, we're just going to send you to state college and to meet with their doctor. So I flew back home. I went to state college, and then that day, a small child and a grandfather walked down into the clubhouse, and there was Josiah and Dave. And then we talked, Dave and I, we found out we were from the same area. He lives an hour from my hometown, and we spoke for an hour that day. And then we kept in touch. I went to every one of Josiah's doctor's appointments. We got coffee in the off season, and I just listened to him because he was so filled with wisdom, and he was somebody I wanted to be around. And then a year later, a book proposal came around, and that's how we met. That's how the story happened, all from breaking a hand and being sent to state college. So, and that matters so much to me, where this really isn't, nothing that happened to me was in my own plan. And I don't want to bring any religion or faith to it. I am a devout Christian. That's something that matters a lot to me. Mm-hmm. And meeting Dave and meeting his family and him being able to pour into me, that matters more to me than a book. And I hope people that read our story, took half of what I was able to take from Dave. And it really, again, it was incredible how it happened. Some of the lowest moments and some of the best moments, all within, one fastball to my left hand.
And what was that experience like, being for your first book, being more of a conduit or a co-writer for his story? Because it definitely is more. It feels more like Dave's voice, but you're sure. Clearly the person like taking the reins of it, but you're like sort of putting it through that filter. So what's that like for right. you as a writer to write basically on behalf of someone else, co-write and ghostwrite, if you will?
Yeah, so that's something that I think really helped me as a writer, because first off, it really humbles you. This story is not about me. It's not even mine. So to have that mindset going in, it's really a humbling sense of, okay, this is not about me. This story now, again, I think the reason why our story was able to resonate a little bit more was everyone that heard about this story, every one of them wanted to go right to Josiah, which, very much is deserving. And Josiah is somebody that truly changed my life. But they all want to talk about his disease. They all want to talk about what he went through, his struggles. But the story was actually I would say the deeper story was a story of a family, a story of a family struggling to heal. And this little boy was dropped into this imperfect family and forced them down a path of healing. So that was our story. It had to come from Dave. There was no other person that could have told this story. This was a story about Josiah through the eyes of a broken grandfather. And Dave's story is just as harrowing as anyone else's. He was part of some of the worst child abuse in really Pennsylvania history. It was swept under the rug. It was something that, especially in a small coal mining town, that's not talked about. That's not something that's brought up. And he grew resentful towards the world of it. He cut himself off to this earth pretty much. The family struggled. His marriage, his family, everything was struggling. And then there was this child that was, he was diagnosed with Hutchins-Gilford progeria syndrome, which is a terrible disease. It's even hard to research. It was hard to understand. And now this family that was struggling so much is now forced into a choice. Either they can live with resentment, or they can find the few years that they have together and they can find a way to live it as a family. Now that is a story that is, to me, was life-changing. And that's where the story comes from. So to be a co-author, I think you need to push that narrative. You can't push your own agenda. You have to understand what are they actually trying to say? And you need to be, just like a journalist, you need to be able to dig into that story. And so for me, personally, it was not only moving as a human being, but as a writer, now it really humbles you to the story. There's nothing greater than the story beneath the story. And my job as a co-author, as a ghostwriter, as a journalist, as a narrative writer, is to find that and to push that, and then to be able to connect it to somebody reading it.
What was your great takeaway as a writer and an artist from going through the mill of generating that book that you were able to then sort of grow and propel off of that project? So what was your big sort of a growth as a writer as a result of having done this book?
I honestly think it was the ability to tell a story. That is different than writing. And that, I don't know if it's an issue of how we teach, quote unquote, writing, or how we look at it. But the first thing we want to look at is plot and prose, right? Which are on the outside. Yeah, that's what a story is built on, right? The story is actually based on human connection. So, I had to rewrite this book 4 different times, and not just like, oh, we edited it. No, I rewrote it 4 times. And and granted, what was right about it the entire time was that the connection between the characters and their struggles beneath the surface, all of that was correct. So the biggest takeaway, was just that a story is not about words. There's only 26 letters. There's only so many combinations you can do. It's not about, very fluent, beautiful prose. That is great, and I hope one day I can get there. But it's about story, and it's about people. And if we ever lose sight of that, I think you're going to lose your reader. That was something that really stuck with me. And now, that's all I care about in story. I mean, I only look for stories that make us try to understand human connection better. And that's all I want to write about.
Yeah, and that goes to a point that you made in another essay you wrote that really tethers to your identity as a ball player, is when you cited Tom Buchanan from The Great Gatsby of him not wanting to identify as a polo player anymore, and it's just like, well, that's an element of fiction that was written in the 1920s or took place in the 20s, and and I think it was published in the 30s. Maybe it was published in the 20s. I should know this.
We'll go with no. That's fine. I can't tell you any difference. So
yeah, but that's just like the universal sort of grace note of that, like of someone wanting to be known for something else, like in that story. So there was something bubbling underneath that you were able to connect to. So that's kind of what you're getting at, that you want to get to what's underneath the prose.
Exactly. I mean, that's any story that's worth reading, I believe, is about, what it costs for the person to change. What is the human connection? What do they have to do to get there? And yeah, story very much. And again, I think we need to make a difference of, journalism. There's going to be a very strict line of how straight you can tell it, and then being able to bring out the storytelling aspect underneath that. There is a time and place for everything, but what's so important to me is not taking things as just face value. You can find the true story beneath the surface that needs to be told, and I think that's our job as storytellers.
Progressing forward, you said you had to kind of really tear it down and rewrite it several times. I often talk to people about the grind of the middle of drafts, and that's a whole different beast than having to rip it down and build it up again. So how did you not get like demoralized by that process of having to really strip it down and build it back up several times?
Sure. So I mean, I really believe that goes back to baseball. The same concepts that we had of going through a season, of going through slumps and highs and lows. Like, to me, it was never an option to not go through that time. There was, maybe it was because this was my first, I would say bigger production that I've done. And I would say probably at, definitely at the highest level that I was at, especially at the time. there was no other option. It wasn't like I was like, it's good enough. I really, maybe it was the overconfidence of myself, or of just the overconfidence of the story. Maybe I thought the story, which I still do, it could never be sold short. So I had to figure out a way to give every ounce of what I had. I just kept saying, get it to the point where you can give it to an editor and they can take it further than you can. And, again, maybe that was just a mantra that I thought would work. As my relationships with editors grow, I still do believe in that. Good editing is what a good writer needs. But yeah, there was no other option. So I just try to figure out ways of just making it better and maybe just a little bit better. And then, you get to a point where if it's just like carpentry, you work on something for so long, if you keep fiddling with it, you're going to split the wood. So, that's where are parts of the story overworked? Yeah, of course there are. Are parts exactly how they should be? I think there's more of those parts than there are overworked. So, I'm still extremely happy with how it came out. I think it really, I give Dave all the credit to that because of how genuine and how open he was. So, and that's also part of it where, man, the one thing I wish I was better at, and I do regret, is I wish I was a better interviewer at the time. We got into some really, really particularly heavy and brutal topics that Dave had to talk about. He had to, open up doors that, maybe he hasn't even thought about in 30 years. And I regret it that I fumbled the conversations a lot. I had to go back and ask him questions for a second time that no person should have to answer twice. So the one thing I do regret is not the writing, but the interview process. That was the only thing I think that still bothers me today is that, how much I love Dave of how open he was of, going through some of these emotions and some of these stories for the second, third time, just because I wasn't good enough at the start. And that, I think, was what sparked me to say, okay, I'm going to do this again. I'm going to write another story in my life. I'm going to co-author more books. I'm going to help people tell their stories, and I'm never going to do that again. I'm not, if I have to, whatever I have to learn, whatever I have to do, I'm never going to make someone go through that interview process twice. And that's, maybe it's a big takeaway, but that's one of the reasons why I didn't mind, putting in more work, because I know how much I asked of Dave.
And how did you arrive at the great two-part feature that you were able to do on the Cape Cod League that subsequently was a notable selection for Best American Sports Writing? So how'd you arrive at this story?
So that came to me from a friend, really, and all the text message said was, "Hey, you gotta look up the 2017 Cape Cod League." And I was like, "All right, yeah, sure." So I looked it up, and I had a connection with Coach Shevchik, the head coach that the story was about. And I said, "Hey, do you mind just telling me how you guys won the championship?" And of course, and it was like, "Yeah, absolutely." So, and he's a real he is a bulldog of a coach. There's no other way of describing it. So him telling me the story, and then he said something when it wasn't even recording. I was just talking to him about it, and he said that after their first year, they scrapped it, and he went back to the Keystone way. And that is what started this whole thing to uncover the story, because the story ultimately is about, really the story is about Shevchik. It's about his transformation and actually what he is giving to kids at Keystone and Cape Cod League is what I believe he deserves in his life that he's not getting. So there is this juxtaposition of how much he gives versus what he can get in return, which is it's a really, I think there should be a deeper character dive. I didn't have that much real estate to go into it of what is pulling in Shevchik's mind. But once he said about the Keystone way of recruiting, that is what started this whole thing, that he was able to find players that no other team would take, right? They were players that, did they deserve to be in the Cape Cod League? To other coaches' standards, maybe not. They weren't at great schools. They weren't at big-time schools. They were either, maybe they were at a big-time school, but they were young. They were inexperienced. They were not proven. And Chef took all of them. The only stipulation was that he needed somebody that would play harder than anybody else and had more to prove than what they've already proven. And that was extremely interesting to me. So the story unfolds like a freaking movie. I'll tell you what, man, I lucked out on that. You know, the way as I was writing this and as I was researching it, I actually researched more about the story that I'm writing because I figured somebody else already wrote this. I'm like, there's no way 1 year has passed before anybody else has caught this story. So I looked up every publication of trying to find anything about, you know, this style, this team, these players, and there was nothing. So I thought I was like getting away with something. Like I was going to do this until somebody said, "Oh yeah, well, you know, ESPN wrote this story a month ago." You know, that's how I figured the story was going to end. I was able to write the whole thing, and you know, Chef Chick gave me not only his blessing, but then got me in contact with every major character, and these characters are like straight from a movie book. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous of the types of people that were involved in this thing. Even I couldn't even get into it, but one of their assistant coaches is like a concert pianist. He's a professor. He's a coach. I mean, he was this interesting dude that I wish I could write more on. That actually he got cut pretty much from the story. Like a greater lesson from all this was like that story got rejected from like almost every publication I reached out to. You know, was there other factors involved? Definitely. Actually, you said one of them. There was a lot of people that already published a baseball story that year. So, you know, having another story about the Cape Cod League made no sense, which I got. And that makes perfect sense to me. Why would you publish the same thing twice? You know, this thing just kept getting rejected. And then, you know, a site that was called Purpose to Play, it's part of a fan-sided network. You know, I shot the editor a pitch, and she said, you know, I love this story. This is what our website represents. So, I mean, dude, it's not like I wrote that, and, you know, full disclosure, you know, the amount of work that I put into it to get like a couple $100 from it, like it was never about the money. I mean, this story, it just needed to get out. And that's what I love about the art that I do is that, you know, I'm fortunate enough that I do have a separate career in a way. But, you know, went out and it did very well. Their site picked it up even more, and it kept kind of getting this little buzz behind it, which was really nice for that story and Chef Chick. You know, I was overconfident about it, but I said, I have no one really in my corner with these things. I'm trying to figure out as I go, and I read the best American sports writing. I read the travel essays. I read almost all of them. So I said, what's the worst thing that could happen? You know, like I'm not losing anything if I put it myself, dude. Like I dropped it into the mailbox, like to send it to Vermont. Like there was nobody who did that for me. And yeah, and I ended up getting part of the notable stories, which was you know, pretty exciting because I didn't hear anything back from them. So obviously I didn't think I got it, which was okay, cool. Another rejection, no big deal. And then I was in Barnes and Noble, and I picked it up. I was being all like brash and everything. I was saying, oh, you know, let's see who made it in. And I didn't. And then I flipped to the notable writings, and I was like, oh, all right, I'm going to buy this book now. So that's kind of how that all happened.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's so. And I love that. That anytime I've never been selected for either thing, but I've submitted work, and I've had to do it myself too. You have to be your own advocate, and Glenn says you know, yeah, he's just like, it's cool for you to submit your own work. You know, you have to be your own advocate, and I love that that's what you did. You know, you stood up for your own work, and to get into the back of the book there is just it's a tremendous honor, and you should be like. I know you are proud, and you need to be proud because that's an amazing honor, and it's because you stood up for your work.
Oh well, thank you. For real, that does mean a lot because I think I did it on a whim, I think more because of the respect I have for the book and like you said, you have to stand up for your work. And I said, I get rejected every day. I mean, heck, I just finished writing something now that I would just send it out to get rejected at least a dozen times. Like that's part of what we do. And so I said, what is the worst? Do I print out paper and I get rejected again? Like that's part of it. The great thing about writing is that I don't have a time limit like I did with athletics. There's only a small window you have for athletics. I mean, I'm going to be a writer, hopefully, God willing, for the next 50 years of my life.
Yeah.
There's no changing that. I mean, I breathe, so I write. There's no deviation from that. So I have 50 years to become the writer that I hope to be.
Oh yeah, and thumbing through the back there, and I always like to see, who makes it, who I've spoken to, who are friends and peers, and just up and down that list, your name is among Seth Wickersham, Eva Holland, Bronwyn Dickey, all these people who are just like. These are like the cream of the crop, and it's just gotta, your name's among them and anthologized and sort of ossified in stone. So that's just great. All the more great stuff, and all the more validating that you're doing the right thing, you're on the right path, and you just gotta keep going. Like, I'm very excited to see what you do next now.
Well, I do appreciate that, and I think Wright Thompson is one of the best sports writers that I've ever read in my life. So
yeah.
The fact that he was, I think, the first story in that book.
Yeah, if you're batting leadoff in the anthology, like that's the place.
Yeah, you did something pretty good. But no, I do appreciate that, and I do look forward to what I can learn from some of these people. I mean, I'm currently reading those stories and deconstructing them and seeing what they have and how they were able to tell a better story than I did, how they were able to connect deeper, or being able to make to make the read better, if that makes sense. How can I make people want to read the next sentence, the next page? And I think that's probably the next phase of my development as a writer. I don't think it's going to be, having to stick with it or the discipline to do it or any of that, the habitual sense. But I definitely look forward to learning from other writers and other editors of how they go about their business. That's, I think, what separates some of the great storytellers and some of the not so great storytellers. But
yeah, and it's just like what Roy Peter Clark would say, the America's writing coach, if you will. He his latest book, I think he's got another one coming out, but his latest one, I believe, is X-Ray Reading. And it's basically just what you're saying. It's kind of deconstructing what makes good writing. And
sure.
So that it's like deconstructing that. It's like, all right, what are the elements that make this work? Glenn, the editor of that series and prolific author himself, he has this great term of when one of his writers, that he was editing was having a hard time, he told him or her to pull down an issue of Best American Sports Writing and just shotgun leads, as he said. Just go through every story and read the lead of every single one. Whatever it was, 250, 500, maybe even 1,000-word lead, but just to get, not to plagiarize, not to copy, but to just see what they're doing. And that informs the writing, and that's kind of deconstructing it and seeing how the good ones do it, because you can emulate them, and then through all that, your voice will develop, but you're just going to start imprinting a lot of really good habits if you do that.
Oh, absolutely. No, and it's true. I mean, even when we're talking about co-authoring, I think that helped me actually find my voice as a writer, because I had to first learn how to write through other people. So now that took the focus off of me trying to be poetic and, filled with beautiful prose. It was like, okay, how would this person, what do they actually mean? How would they say it? What are they trying to get at? Those are things that I think really helped me when I didn't even know it was helping me as a writer. And, you kind of brought up as you're talking about that. First off, I'm going to start doing that, because I don't do that. I just, read and deconstruct that. I'm going to start shotgunning all these leads. But let's look at how do chefs learn how to cook, right? One of the things that is extremely important is not just learning how to cook a meal, right? They study where it came from. They study, the flavors that go into it. They know more about agriculture, I think, than some people even give them credit for. And then along with that, they're able to taste something and then be able to deconstruct what goes into making that. And I thought about this when I was learning. I don't know why I was learning about, I can't cook, but I was learning about how chefs study, and that really, shaped how I view writing. I mean, there's anything that you Google, you can find like, 6 ways to make a better manuscript, like all these different things. Most of them are hacks. Most of them are clickbait. But let's look at how authors, bring flavor to what they're doing. Let's look at, okay, if a chef just tasted this, whatever it might be, this soup, and now they're able to deconstruct it and then make it better themselves, why don't we do that with essays? Why don't we do that with books? Why don't we do that with somebody telling a story? So that's kind of, I'm glad we're talking about this, because that's really how, I like to spend my time now doing that, reading stories and deconstructing, where they came from. And it's really profound in a way of trying to understand how the author is going about what they're doing, not just what they are doing.
Oh, how do you fold, reading and deep reading, X-ray reading, if you will, into your day? And what are some of those maybe go-to books or essays or magazine articles that you revisit to remind yourself how it's done?
Yeah. The first thing, I read everything that Wright Thompson writes, not because I want to write like him. I read Wright Thompson because it reminds me of what perfection looks like. Yeah. So, his writings of even, the story of the Dan Gable, the losses of Dan Gable is something, if you want to see how a nonfiction story, a nonfiction essay should read, I mean, that reads like a fiction story. That is something that is really incredible. So I would definitely I'll read him. Every morning I read The Athletic. I think I really, that's getting more popular in a sense. And I think it's something that I definitely connect with, because the idea there is, hey, let's fall in love with the sports page again. Let's tell stories, not just of what's happening now, but let's tell a little bit deeper, a little bit long form about the people involved with sports. So I really connect with that. I'll read that religiously every single morning, no matter what. But with the deep reading and the X-ray reading, if you will, I just schedule that into my day, just like it would be another meeting at work or another writing session. I schedule it in completely. There's no getting around it. If you want to be a great writer, you have to be a great reader. That is the ability. There's no getting around that. Like there's nothing else to be said about that. So I schedule it into my day of enjoyment reading and then also like study reading. Those are two different sections. And any minute reading is not a minute wasted. So I really believe that, especially as a writer. But I actually started to really enjoy fiction, not necessarily due to the nature of what's going on, but I think in fiction you have to develop character even more than what's expected of somebody reading it, right? So you have to fall in love with characters or you're not going to finish the book. I mean, you have 300 to 400 pages of a story, and so you have to fall in love with the character. So I do love fiction. I mean, Jodi Picoult is one of the greatest writers, and I will read all of her work. She's a complete fiction writer, and I love Kristen Hanna as well. I mean, I know these are more fiction than anything, but I think we can learn a lot from fiction writing, especially in the crafting of story. So I'll read them very religiously. I'm pretty much like a fangirl of anything they come out with, I'll read. but yeah, definitely The Athletic is where I spend most of my time. I think it's minimum of an hour every morning reading The Athletic. There are some other places, like I do love The Undefeated. I do love reading some things of ESPN, some of the basic. I don't think there's anything wrong with reading mass media because there's a reason why they're able to reach so many people. I'll X-ray a lot on fiction.
Well, that's great. Well, Jake, this was awesome. I hope this is the first of many conversations we have about talking shop like this, because there's definitely a lot of things given more time, I'd like to unpack. So that just means we're going to have to do this again, I hope, in the future.
Man, I would have loved to. Again, like I told you, I've been listening to this podcast now for a couple of years. I enjoy the people you've had on, and the great thing about it, I read most of their work that you've had on. I've also been rejected by most of the editors that you've had on. So
Nice.
It is really, this is a fun experience to connect it all together. But I really respect the people you have on the show. So having me on this with them it really does mean the world to me. So I hope we can do this again, and I hope the answers that I give of your questions are totally different than what I'm answering now. So I do appreciate this time.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Jake. And like I said, we'll do this again down the road for sure when more of your work comes out. So, well, that's it, CNFers. Thanks to Jake and, of course, Bay Path University for the support. We love it, baby. Subscribe to the show, friend. You know where to find it. Also, the newsletter. The newsletter? The newsletter. My monthly newsletter. There's good stuff coming to subscribers. So you know what to do. BrendanO'Mara.com. Either the pop-up or the form at the end of blog posts, or on the smart bar across the top. Once a month, no spam. As far as I can tell, you can't beat it. If you deem the show worth sharing, link up to it on social media. You can tag me in the show at CNFPod. Though, as you know, I'm scaling back on social media herd. So if I don't give you mad props right away, that James Hetfield headbanging gif, that's why. Time to go, CNFers. I'm flying into the belly of the beast for Christmas, man. So if you don't hear from me ever again, you'll know what happened. Oh, but just remember this. If you can't do interviews, see ya.